The rain was pounding against the broken windows of a small suburban house, and inside that house, a nightmare was unfolding. Olivia, 28 years old and 5 months pregnant, pressed her back against the kitchen wall, trembling. Her heart raced not only because of fear, but also because she knew she had to protect the little life inside her. Her husband, Mark, stood in the center of the room, holding a black stun gun in his hand, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "You think you can hide money from me?" Mark growled, his voice dripping with venom. He took a step closer, the blue sparks of the stun gun flashing in the dim light. "Please, Mark, please don't, the baby." Olivia's voice cracked as she begged, tears streaming down her pale face. But Mark had long since stopped hearing her. Gambling debts had turned him into a monster. Every night he returned home more violent, more paranoid, more cruel. And tonight, in his rage, he had decided to use the one weapon that could make her scream in ways words never could. The sharp sound of electricity filled the room. Olivia's breath caught. She clutched her belly, praying desperately. Then it happened. A crackle of pain surged through her body as Mark pressed the stun gun against her arm. She screamed, her knees buckling as she slid to the floor. The sound of her cry pierced through the storm outside, reaching the ears of a neighbor walking her dog down the street. That neighbor stopped in her tracks, listening. Something wasn't right. Inside the house, Olivia's world was collapsing. She tried to crawl away, her hands scraping the cold tile floor, but Mark's heavy boots followed her every movement. "You'll learn not to defy me," he shouted, his rage echoing through the kitchen. Olivia's eyes darted toward the door, her only chance of escape, but Mark blocked her path. She felt trapped, powerless, like an animal in a cage. Her tears mixed with the rainwater dripping from the ceiling, creating small puddles around her shaken body. In her mind, a single thought repeated like a prayer. "Not the baby. Not the baby." Mark raised the stun gun again. The blue sparks danced like lightning in the darkness. Olivia's scream this time was so desperate, so raw, that it reached into the hearts of those who would later hear about this night. But what Mark didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that someone powerful had already been keeping an eye on Olivia. Somewhere not far from that small, broken home, a man with immense resources and a hidden connection to Olivia's past was watching everything unfold. And unlike Mark, this man would not stay silent. The storm outside grew louder, thunder shaking the ground, but inside, Olivia's nightmare had only just begun. What happened next would not only change her life forever, but also drag secrets from the shadows that even Mark could never control. Before the bruises, before the tears, before the nights of terror, Olivia was known in her small town as the kindest teacher anyone had ever met. At 28, she had dedicated her life to the children at Maple Grove Elementary. Her classroom was always filled with drawings, laughter, and the sound of Olivia's gentle voice guiding little hands through lessons. Parents admired her patience, students adored her warmth, and the community respected her selflessness. She never had much money. Her parents had passed away when she was still in college, leaving her to struggle alone. But Olivia never complained. She worked part-time jobs to pay tuition, and when life felt overwhelming, she whispered to herself, "One day, I'll have a family. One day, I won't feel alone." That dream kept her going, even through the hardest nights. When Mark entered her life, he seemed like the answer to that dream. He was handsome, charming, and full of promises. He spoke of building a future together, of buying a house, of never letting her feel lonely again. Olivia, starved for affection, believed him. Within a year, they were married. To her, he was not only a husband, but also the family she had always longed for. The early months were sweet. Mark would bring her flowers, cook her favorite meals, even surprise her with little notes that said, "Forever yours." Olivia carried those notes in her purse, smiling at them during breaks at school. She told her colleagues she had found her soulmate. But behind the smiles, shadows began to creep in. Mark had a weakness: gambling. At first, it was harmless poker nights with friends, then it became trips to the casino, then secret debts, then desperate lies. Olivia tried to believe he could change, that the man who once held her hand with tenderness was still inside him. When she found out she was pregnant, she felt renewed hope. "Maybe this will save us," she thought. "Maybe the baby will bring out the best in him." She imagined a nursery with yellow walls, lullabies at night, and Mark holding their child with pride. But the reality was far from her dream. Mark grew more violent, more unpredictable. When bills piled up and creditors called, he turned his anger on her. Still, Olivia endured. She wore long sleeves to cover bruises, told her coworkers she was just tired when they asked why her eyes looked swollen. She carried the weight of silence because she believed protecting Mark was the same as protecting her marriage. Every night, she whispered to her unborn child, "Mommy will keep you safe. Mommy loves you." It was her secret ritual, a vow she refused to break. Yet as the months passed, the tension in the house grew unbearable. The man she had once loved now terrified her. The promises of forever yours were replaced with shouts, threats, and fists slamming against walls. Olivia began to wonder if love had blinded her too deeply, if she had mistaken chains for devotion. Still, somewhere deep inside, she clung to hope. She remembered her parents' sacrifices, the lessons she taught her students about courage and kindness. People can change, she told herself. Maybe tomorrow will be better. But tomorrow never got better. Tomorrow only brought more fear. And as the stormy night of the stun gun attack approached, Olivia was about to learn the harshest truth of all, that love alone cannot save someone who has already chosen destruction. And in that moment, as her fragile dream of family began to shatter, a stranger from her past was preparing to step into her story in a way she never could have imagined. In the beginning, Olivia told herself every marriage had its struggles. When Mark stayed out late, she convinced herself he was working overtime. When money mysteriously disappeared from their bank account, she believed his excuses about unexpected expenses. She wanted so badly to trust him, because trust was the foundation she thought their marriage was built on. But as months turned into years, the cracks in Mark's mask grew impossible to ignore. One evening, while cleaning the laundry, Olivia found a receipt tucked in his pants pocket. It wasn't from a grocery store or a gas station, it was from a casino. The amount scrawled across the paper made her stomach twist. Hundreds of dollars gone in a single night. When she confronted him, Mark laughed it off. "Baby, it's nothing, just a little fun with the guys. Don't worry so much." His smile was charming, but his eyes were cold. Olivia wanted to believe him. She wanted to cling to the memory of the man who once promised her forever. But deep down, fear began to grow. The gambling escalated quickly. First, it was weekends at the casino. Then, it was weekdays, too. Olivia would wake up alone in bed, staring at the empty space beside her, listening for the sound of the door that often didn't open until sunrise. His debts mounted. Creditors began calling the house, their voices sharp and threatening. When Olivia tried to talk to him about it, Mark's temper flared. He slammed his fist against the table, sending her tea spilling across the floor. "I'm the man of this house," he snapped. "Don't you dare question me." It was the first time Olivia saw the violence in his eyes, the kind that made her instinctively step back. Her heart pounded as she pressed a hand against her belly, silently protecting the baby she carried. Still, she held on to hope. She remembered the vows they had exchanged, the nights they whispered about a future together. She told herself, "He's just stressed. He'll change when the baby comes." But instead of changing, Mark spiraled further. He borrowed money from dangerous people, men who showed up at their doorstep with cold stares and heavy threats. Olivia overheard one of them say, "If you don't pay up, you'll regret it." She shivered at the words, realizing her husband's choices had placed both of them in danger. As the pressure grew, so did Mark's cruelty. He snapped at her for little things. Dinner not hot enough, the house not clean enough, her questions too persistent. One night when she gently asked about their bills, he threw a plate across the room, the shattering sound echoing through the house. Olivia froze, staring at the pieces scattered across the floor, realizing her marriage was breaking in the same way. She cried quietly that night, curled up in bed, holding her belly as if her unborn child could give her strength. She whispered, "Mommy will find a way to protect you." But Mark wasn't finished showing her who he really was. The man who once held her hand with tenderness had transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone who valued money and control more than love. And as Olivia sat alone in the dark, unaware of how much worse things would become, she felt a chill run through her body, as though fate itself was warning her of the storm about to break. because soon, Mark's gambling addiction would no longer be a secret Olivia could hide, and his rage would turn from broken plates to something far more dangerous. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Olivia's bedroom, but instead of feeling warmth, she felt the sting of fresh bruises blooming on her arms. She sat at the edge of her bed, quietly slipping on a long-sleeved blouse, wincing as the fabric brushed against her tender skin. Every movement reminded her of the fight from the night before. Mark yelling, the sound of his fists slamming into the wall inches from her face, his grip leaving purple marks on her wrist. She studied herself in the mirror. Her once bright eyes now looked dull, weighed down by sleepless nights and silent tears. She carefully applied makeup, trying to cover the swelling near her cheekbone. She didn't want questions. She didn't want pity. More than anything, she didn't want anyone to know the truth about the man she had married. At school, Olivia transformed into a different person. Her students ran into her classroom, shouting her name, clinging to her with innocent joy. She smiled at them, hiding her pain behind warmth. She knelt beside their desks, corrected their work, and told them they could be anything they dreamed of. No one saw the trembling in her hands or the way she winced when a child hugged her too tightly. Her colleagues noticed small things. "Olivia, are you feeling okay? You look tired." She brushed it off with a soft laugh, blaming long nights of pregnancy. When asked about the faint bruise near her temple, she claimed she tripped on the stairs. Lies came easily now, as natural as breathing. But when she was alone, the facade collapsed. In the bathroom at school, she locked the door and pressed her hands against the sink, staring at her reflection. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I have to be strong. For the baby." She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the faint flutter of life inside her. That tiny heartbeat was the only reason she found the strength to keep going. At home, she avoided Mark as much as possible. She cooked his meals, cleaned the house, and spoke softly to avoid triggering his rage. She had memorized the sound of his footsteps, the tone of his voice, the smell of alcohol that often preceded his violence. Living with him was like walking through a minefield. Every step had to be careful, calculated. One evening she thought she saw a glimpse of the man she once loved. Mark came home unusually quiet, sat at the table, and placed his hand on her stomach. "It's going to be a boy," he said with a smile that almost seemed real. For a fleeting second, Olivia's heart softened. She dared to hope that the baby might bring them back together, but the moment passed quickly. By the next night, the gambling calls returned, and so did his rage. Olivia realized she could no longer trust his words, only his actions, and his actions told her he was a man sinking deeper into darkness. Still, she kept silent. She endured. She told herself she had no choice. Where could she go? She had no parents, no siblings, no family to run to. Divorce felt impossible, shameful. So she stayed, sacrificing her own safety to protect the fragile hope of giving her baby a family. Yet silence has a price. Every bruise left unseen, every tear cried alone, every scream muffled into a pillow was pushing Olivia closer to a breaking point. And soon the night would come when her silence could no longer protect her, or the child growing inside her. The night it happened, the air was heavy with rain. Thunder rolled in the distance, and lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the cracks in the old house where Olivia lived her daily nightmare. She had just finished preparing a simple dinner, soup and bread, when Mark stormed through the door, his shirt soaked, his eyes blazing with fury. "Where's the money, Olivia?" he barked, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Her heart leapt into her throat. She clutched her belly instinctively. "What money? I don't have anything." "Don't lie to me." His voice was sharp, jagged, like broken glass. "I know you're hiding cash. I know you've been saving behind my back." Olivia shook her head, tears already welling in her eyes. "Mark, please. I would never." Before she could finish, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a black stun gun. The crackle of electricity filled the room, its cold sound louder than the storm outside. Olivia's breath caught. She stepped back, bumping against the kitchen counter, her hands trembling. "Please, Mark. The baby. Think about the baby." But Mark was past reason. His face twisted into something cruel, unrecognizable. "If you won't listen, maybe this will teach you." The first jolt hit her arm. Pain surged through her body like fire, her scream echoing against the kitchen walls. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her stomach. Tears blurred her vision as she gasped for air. "Get up," Mark snarled, towering over her. He pressed the stun gun close to her face, the sparks inches from her skin. "You don't defy me, do you understand?" Olivia sobbed, her body trembling uncontrollably. She tried to crawl away, dragging herself across the cold tile floor, but Mark followed, his boots thudding behind her. Every sound made her flinch, every movement screamed danger. "Stop! Please!" she cried out, her voice raw. "You're hurting us!" But her words only seemed to fuel his rage. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her upward. She screamed again, clutching her stomach, desperate to shield the life inside her. Then another jolt ripped through her body. Her scream this time was so piercing it carried beyond the walls of the house, slipping out into the stormy night. A neighbor walking her dog paused, frowning, certain she'd just heard something terrible. Inside, Olivia's world was spinning. The pain was unbearable, her body convulsing as she collapsed again, curling protectively over her belly. She whispered through sobs, "Not the baby? Please? Not the baby." But Mark was relentless. His breathing was heavy, his anger insatiable. He stood over her, pointing the stun gun down like a weapon of war. The man she once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who thrived on her pain. In that moment, Olivia realized she might not survive the night. And worse, her baby might not either. The storm outside raged louder, the rain pounding against the roof, thunder shaking the ground. Olivia's scream echoed once more, cutting through the night like a blade. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen, unheard, someone else was watching. Someone with power, with means, and with a reason to intervene. Someone who had been waiting for the right moment to step into Olivia's shattered world. What Mark could never have imagined was that this brutal night would be the beginning of his downfall. And the stranger watching would soon change Olivia's life forever. The storm outside masked many sounds, but Olivia's scream cut through like a desperate cry for help. On the sidewalk across the street, an elderly woman named Mrs. Jenkins froze. She had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years and had seen her share of arguments between couples. But this was different. This wasn't anger, it was terror. Her small dog tugged at the leash, barking nervously as if sensing danger. Mrs. Jenkins's hands shook as she tightened her coat around her frail body. She had always noticed that Olivia seemed too quiet, too guarded. There were mornings when Olivia's eyes looked swollen, her smiles forced. But tonight confirmed the suspicions she had buried for months. Something was very, very wrong inside that house. Another scream rang out, followed by a thud. Mrs. Jenkins gasped. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator answered. It's my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins whispered urgently. I heard a woman screaming. It sounded like she was in pain. Please, you have to send someone. The address is 421 Oakwood Lane. The operator assured her officers were on their way. But as Mrs. Jenkins ended the call, fear gnawed at her chest. What if help came too late? Inside the house, Olivia lay on the floor, her body shaking from the shocks. Her tears mixed with sweat as she tried to catch her breath. Every second felt like an eternity, her mind screaming for escape. She pressed a hand to her stomach, praying her baby was still safe. Mark paced the room, muttering angrily, You think you can embarrass me? You think you can make me look weak? He jabbed the stun gun into the air, sparks flying dangerously close to her. Olivia's lips quivered. She wanted to scream again, to beg him to stop, but the fear strangled her voice. She could only sob silently, her body curling into itself. Outside, Mrs. Jenkins lingered on the sidewalk, unable to walk away. She watched the flickering light through the broken blinds, the shadows moving violently. Her heart pounded as sirens faintly echoed in the distance. Relief washed over her. Help was coming. But then another thought struck her. What if Mark realized the police were on their way? What if he did something even worse before they arrived? The idea made her stomach twist. She prayed silently for Olivia, whispering, Hold on, sweetheart. Just hold on. Inside, the storm of violence raged on. Mark's paranoia grew sharper, his rage uncontrollable. He leaned down, grabbing Olivia by the collar of her blouse, pulling her up roughly. She whimpered, too weak to resist. You belong to me, he spat. Don't you ever forget that. Olivia's tears blurred her vision, but in the haze, she thought she saw something, movement outside the window. For a split second, her eyes widened with fragile hope. Was someone there? Was she not as alone as she thought? Mark noticed her glance and snarled. "What are you looking at?" He shoved her back down, pressing the stun gun close to her side. The storm roared, the sirens drew closer, and Mrs. Jenkins gripped her dog's leash tighter. Her heart raced as she saw 2 police cars turn onto the street, red and blue lights cutting through the rain. She exhaled shakily, whispering, "Please let them get there in time." But inside the house, Mark hadn't heard the sirens yet. His rage was still boiling, his weapons still sparking, and Olivia's strength was slipping away. And in the next few minutes, the fragile line between survival and tragedy would be decided inside that storm-battered house. The flashing red and blue lights outside the house pierced through the storm. Mark froze for a second, his hands still gripping the stun gun. Olivia, barely conscious on the floor, blinked weakly as the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the rain. Mark's paranoia flared. "Who called them?" he hissed, pacing the kitchen like a trapped animal. He dragged Olivia roughly by the arm, pulling her away from the window. "Don't you dare say a word." 2 police officers knocked hard on the door. "Police, open up." Mark shoved the stun gun into a drawer and forced a smile before yanking the door open. "Officers," he said, feigning calm. "Is there a problem?" "We received a report of a woman screaming inside this house," one officer said firmly. His eyes scanned the room, noticing Olivia slumped in the corner, clutching her stomach. Her face was pale, her tears still fresh. "She's pregnant," Mark said quickly, forcing a laugh. She slipped and fell. "You know how emotional women get." Olivia opened her mouth to speak, but fear gripped her throat. Mark's glare cut into her like a blade. She lowered her head, saying nothing. The officers exchanged looks. One of them stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Olivia nodded weakly, though every part of her body screamed to beg for help. Her silence sealed the officer's decision. After a few more questions, they left with a warning. Mark shut the door behind them, his face twisting with rage. "You see what you almost did?" he shouted, slamming his fist against the wall. "You almost ruined everything." What Mark didn't know was that someone else had already seen everything. Weeks earlier, after a series of violent outbursts, Olivia's cautious neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, had installed a small security camera pointed toward the back of Olivia's house. She worried about the young woman but never had proof, until now. That night, the camera captured Mark shocking Olivia with the stun gun, her screams echoing through the rain. The footage was chilling, undeniable evidence of abuse. Mrs. Jenkins copied the video onto a flash drive. But she wasn't just any neighbor. She volunteered part-time at a local charity supported by one of the city's wealthiest men, David Harrington. David was no ordinary billionaire. Behind his polished suits and powerful connections lay a man who had never forgotten his humble beginnings. Years ago, when he was a struggling young man, a kind woman had once helped him through a crisis. That woman was Olivia's late mother. She had given him food, shelter, and advice when he had nothing. David carried her kindness like a debt he could never repay. So when Mrs. Jenkins nervously approached him at the charity office, saying, "I think you should see this," David listened. He watched the footage in silence, his jaw tightening with every second. Olivia's screams filled the room, the sparks of the stun gun lighting up the dark kitchen. David's hands clenched into fists. Memories of her mother's gentle voice flooded back, and now her daughter was enduring the unimaginable. "Who is the man?" David asked, his voice low but sharp. "Her husband," Mrs. Jenkins replied, her eyes downcast. "I've suspected for a while, but now you see." David leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He was a man of immense wealth, but more importantly, immense influence, and he had just found the reason to use it. He pressed the flash drive into his pocket. "Thank you," he said firmly. "Leave this to me." As Mrs. Jenkins left, David stared out the window at the city skyline, determination burning in his eyes. He had once promised himself that if he ever had the power to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves, now that time had come. And while Mark believed he had silenced Olivia, he had no idea that a billionaire with a personal debt to settle was about to step into the shadows of his life. David Harrington sat in his private office, the flash drive still in his pocket, his mind spinning with memories he thought he had buried long ago. The city lights outside shimmered through the tall glass windows, but all he could see was the past, the night his life had nearly ended, and the woman who had saved him. Decades earlier, David had not been a billionaire. He had been a young man with nothing but debts and disappointment. His father had abandoned the family, his mother had died too soon, and David found himself homeless, hungry, and hopeless. One rainy night, much like the one Olivia now endured, he stumbled into a small church looking for shelter. There, a kind woman named Margaret took him in. She wasn't rich, but her heart overflowed with generosity. She gave him warm food, a blanket, and, more importantly, words that planted seeds of hope. "Your life isn't over," she told him gently, as he shivered by the fire. "One day, you'll have a chance to rise, and when that day comes, you must remember to help someone else the way I've helped you tonight." Those words stayed with him. Years later, through hard work and a string of fortunate business decisions, David built his empire. He became one of the wealthiest men in the state, but he never forgot Margaret's kindness. He quietly funded scholarships, charities, and shelters, all in her honor. And now, as he replayed the video of Olivia suffering under her husband's violence, he realized fate had circled back. Margaret's daughter was in danger. The woman who once gave him a second chance was gone, but her legacy lived on in Olivia. David's heart hardened with resolve. He couldn't stand by and watch her fall into the same darkness he had escaped. He owed Margaret more than money, he owed her justice. The next morning, David summoned his most trusted advisors. "Find me everything on Mark and Olivia Carter," he ordered. "Bank records, debts, history, associates. Leave nothing hidden." Within hours, files were spread across his desk. Mark's life was an open book of failure, mounting gambling debts, unpaid loans, and connections to dangerous loan sharks. Olivia's file painted a different picture. Respected teacher, adored by her students, admired by colleagues. She had no criminal record, no debts, nothing but a reputation for kindness. "She's suffering because of him," David muttered, his voice tight with anger. He slammed the folder shut. "That ends now." His chief of security, a broad-shouldered man named Thomas, looked at him carefully. "Sir, are you sure you want to get involved personally? This could get messy." David's gaze was unshakable. "This isn't business, Thomas. This is personal. Her mother saved me. Now it's my turn to save her." That night, David stood on the balcony of his penthouse, staring at the skyline. The weight of his promise to Margaret pressed heavily on his chest. He remembered her words. "When that day comes, you must remember to help someone else." The day had arrived. But David knew Mark would not go down easily. Men like him never surrendered without a fight. If David was going to protect Olivia, he would need more than wealth. He would need strategy, patience, and proof strong enough to destroy Mark's power over her. And as the storm clouds gathered once again over the city, David clenched his fists, ready to honor a promise made long ago. Because soon, Olivia would discover she was not alone in her battle, and the man who had once been saved by her mother was now preparing to save her. The days after the stun gun attack blurred together for Olivia. Her body ached in ways she had never imagined, and every step felt heavy with fear. She tried to convince herself that if she stayed quiet, if she obeyed, maybe Mark would calm down. But the truth was written all over her fading bruises. He was only getting worse. Her pregnancy, once a beacon of hope, had become dangerously fragile. At her next doctor's appointment, she sat nervously in the cold examination room, her hands clasped tightly together. The doctor's expression was serious as he studied the ultrasound. "Olivia," he said gently, "your baby's heartbeat is there, but it's weak. Stress is affecting you both. You need rest, safety, and peace. If this continues," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "you risk losing the baby." Olivia's throat tightened. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded silently. She wanted to tell him everything, that her husband's fists, his rage, and his cruelty were the true threats, but the words stayed trapped inside her. Shame, fear, and despair formed a cage around her voice. When she returned home, Mark barely looked at her. He sat on the couch, glued to his phone, muttering about debts and schemes. Olivia placed her hand on her stomach, whispering to the life within her, "Stay strong, little one. Mommy will find a way." But her body betrayed her hope. The cramps started at night, sharp pains that made her curl into a ball beneath the covers. She hid them from Mark, biting her lip to keep from crying out, terrified he would see weakness as another reason to lash out. At school, her colleagues noticed her growing frailty. "Olivia, you look pale," one of them said softly. "Are you sure you're okay?" She forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." But inside she was unraveling. Teaching used to bring her joy, but now every lesson felt like climbing a mountain with trembling legs. She longed to tell someone the truth, but fear of what Mark would do kept her silent. The violence escalated in small, insidious ways. A shove when dinner wasn't ready. A cruel insult when she tried to ask about money. One night, he grabbed her so roughly she nearly lost her balance. She screamed, clutching her belly, but Mark only rolled his eyes. "You're too dramatic," he sneered before storming out. Olivia sobbed quietly, rocking herself in the kitchen chair, whispering apologies to the unborn child she could barely protect. The cramps worsened. Blood appeared where it shouldn't. Panic surged through her, but she hid it, terrified of what Mark might do if he realized how fragile she had become. Her only solace was the memory of her mother. Late at night, Olivia would close her eyes and picture Margaret's gentle smile, her voice saying, "You are stronger than you think, my girl." Those memories were the only thing holding her together. But strength has limits, and as the weeks passed, the fragile line between survival and loss grew thinner and thinner. One evening, after another vicious argument, Olivia collapsed in the hallway, clutching her stomach as pain ripped through her body. She gasped for air, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "No, please not now." Mark barely noticed. He stormed out the door, slamming it behind him, leaving her crumpled on the floor, alone in her agony. Outside, the city roared with life, oblivious to the quiet tragedy unfolding inside the small house on Oakwood Lane. And in that moment, Olivia realized she might not only lose her baby, she might lose herself entirely if help didn't come soon. The pain began like a whisper, sharp cramps that made Olivia pause in the middle of folding laundry. She pressed her hand against her stomach, breathing deeply, telling herself it was nothing. But as the minutes passed, the cramps grew stronger, more insistent, like a cruel storm building inside her body. She staggered to the bathroom, her heart pounding. When she saw the blood, her breath caught in her throat. Her knees buckled as she grabbed the sink for support. "No?" she whispered, shaking her head. "Not my baby. Please, God, not my baby." Her vision blurred with tears. Every second felt like a knife twisting deeper, confirming the truth she didn't want to face. The warnings from the doctor echoed in her mind: stress, danger, risk. And now, the unthinkable was happening. She collapsed onto the cold tile floor, clutching her belly as sobs tore from her chest. Alone in that bathroom, Olivia's world shattered. The tiny life she had whispered to at night, the child she had promised to protect, was slipping away. Hours later, at the hospital, the sterile white walls closed in around her. The doctor's words were gentle but merciless. "I'm sorry, Olivia, you've lost the baby." She covered her face with her hands, the sobs uncontrollable now. Her body shook with grief, each cry echoing through the small hospital room. She felt empty, hollow, as if her very soul had been ripped from her body. Mark arrived, but his face showed no sorrow, no regret. Instead, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his tone dripping with irritation. "Well, maybe it's for the best. Less responsibility, less money to worry about." Olivia stared at him, stunned. The man who should have been holding her hand, grieving with her, was cold, dismissive, cruel. A fresh wave of pain hit her, sharper than the physical loss. She realized she was utterly alone in her marriage. Back at home, she wandered through the silent rooms like a ghost. The nursery she had imagined, the yellow walls, the lullabies, the tiny crib, was gone before it ever existed. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, her hands resting on a belly that no longer carried life. Night after night, she cried herself to sleep, her pillow damp with tears. Grief consumed her, but beneath it, something else began to stir. A small voice inside her whispered, "You can't keep living like this. You deserve more. Your baby deserved more." Mark, meanwhile, sank deeper into his vices. He spent long nights at the casino, returning home drunk, angry, and demanding. Olivia endured his cruelty, but something in her had changed. Where there had once been only fear, now a seed of quiet defiance began to grow. She began to imagine a different future. one without Mark, one where she could honor the child she had lost by choosing life, freedom, and dignity. But escaping him would not be easy. He controlled everything, money, decisions, even her voice. And yet, she knew she had to try. Because staying meant death, not just for her body, but for her spirit. One evening, as Mark shouted at her for not having dinner ready fast enough, Olivia looked at him with new eyes. She no longer saw a husband. She saw a prison guard. She saw the man who had destroyed her dream of family. Her grief was not gone, but it was transforming into something else, strength. And as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, Olivia made a silent vow she would find a way out, no matter the cost. The days following the miscarriage were a blur of silence. Olivia moved like a shadow through the house, her eyes empty, her voice barely above a whisper. Grief weighed heavily on her, but beneath that grief, a new determination pulsed quietly. She could no longer deny the truth. Mark had taken everything from her. If she stayed, she would lose not just her dreams, but her life. It began with small thoughts. She pictured herself walking out the door and never looking back. She imagined living in a small apartment, teaching at school without fear, maybe even smiling again. At first, the fantasy seemed impossible, too fragile to believe in. But each day, as Mark's cruelty grew sharper, her vision of escape became stronger. One morning, while Mark was still asleep, Olivia tiptoed into the kitchen. She opened the drawer where he kept the bills, pretending to clean. Her hands shook as she slipped a few dollars into her pocket. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She told herself she would save little by little until she had enough to run. At school, she confided in no one, but she began noticing the posters on the bulletin board. Resources for women in crisis, numbers for shelters, organizations offering help. She copied the numbers onto a scrap of paper and hid it in the lining of her purse. Just knowing she had them gave her a fragile sense of hope. But Mark's paranoia was growing. He sensed her pulling away, and it made him even more dangerous. He accused her of lying, of plotting against him, of embarrassing him in front of others. "You think you're better than me?" he shouted one night, slamming his fist on the table so hard the dishes rattled. Olivia lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "I just want peace, Mark." "Peace?" he sneered. "You'll have peace when you learn your place." His words burned into her, but instead of breaking her, they steeled her resolve. She knew she couldn't wait much longer. That evening, while he went out to gamble, she searched the internet quietly on her phone. She read about legal aid, restraining orders, shelters that took women with no money. Tears filled her eyes as she scrolled, not from despair this time, but from the possibility that freedom wasn't just a dream. It could be real. But the danger of discovery was constant. One night, Mark returned earlier than expected. Olivia had been writing in her notebook, plans, names, addresses, but when she heard the door slam, she shoved it beneath the couch cushion. Her heart pounded as he walked in, his eyes narrowing. "What are you hiding?" he demanded, stepping closer. "Nothing," she whispered, her hands trembling. He searched the room, his suspicion burning. For a terrifying moment, he lifted the couch cushion, but the notebook had slipped further back, just out of sight. He slammed the cushion down and glared at her. "If I ever catch you lying to me, Olivia, you'll regret it." She nodded, swallowing her fear, but inside, her heart screamed, "I have to get out before it's too late." That night, lying awake in the dark, Olivia placed a hand over her empty stomach and whispered, "For you, my little one, I will survive for you." And as she whispered those words, she didn't know that her chance to escape was closer than she realized, but it would come with a risk that could cost her everything. David Harrington was not a man who acted recklessly. Every move in business and life was calculated, deliberate. But when it came to Olivia, calculation wasn't enough. This was personal. Watching the footage of her suffering replayed in his mind every night, he knew he could no longer wait. If he didn't act soon, she might not survive. Still, he couldn't storm into her life without preparation. Mark was volatile, paranoid, and desperate. If David moved too quickly, Mark would tighten his grip on her and make escape even harder. So David chose the shadows. He would protect her quietly, making moves behind the scenes while waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. His first step was information. Through private investigators, David tracked every detail of Mark's debts. Casinos, loan sharks, Hidden accounts. Mark was drowning in obligations he could never pay. That weakness was the key. Next, David began subtle protection. He arranged for one of his trusted men, Thomas, to patrol the neighborhood at night disguised as a passerby. Olivia didn't know it, but someone was always watching her house now, ready to intervene if Mark went too far. One evening, David tested Mark without revealing his hand. He sent an anonymous financial offer through a broker, presenting himself as a potential investor who might help Mark pay off his debts. The idea was simple: lure Mark in, see how far his greed would carry him, and prepare to expose him at the right moment. Mark predictably took the bait. He bragged to Olivia that someone important was interested in his business ideas. Olivia listened quietly, her heart sinking. She knew her husband had no real business, only lies. Yet she also noticed something different in his eyes. Hope mixed with arrogance. The same expression that had once charmed her, but now filled her with dread. At the same time, David began to make Olivia's life slightly easier in ways she didn't notice. An anonymous donation appeared at her school, funding supplies for her students. When Mark forgot to pay the electricity bill, the power mysteriously stayed on. When she went grocery shopping, a stranger in line paid for her quietly before walking away. Each act was small, but it kept her afloat. Still, David remained cautious. He needed Olivia to believe in her own strength, not just in rescue. Watching her through reports and photos, he saw the quiet determination in her eyes. She was planning something. He could feel it. But Mark's paranoia was growing. The more he gambled and lied, the more suspicious he became of Olivia. One night, after losing a large sum, he stormed home drunk, convinced she was hiding money from him. He tore through drawers, shouted in her face, and smashed a glass against the wall. Olivia trembled but stayed silent, protecting the notebook she had hidden under the floorboard. David's man, Thomas, saw the outburst through a window and almost intervened. But David's orders were clear. Wait. Timing was everything. In his penthouse, David poured a glass of whiskey and studied the files again. He thought of Margaret, Olivia's mother, and the promise he had made to himself years ago. He wouldn't fail her now. Soon he would reveal himself. Soon, Mark would know he wasn't the only man in Olivia's life anymore. But before David could step forward, Mark's greed pulled him deeper into the trap, and Olivia was about to be dragged into a dangerous game without realizing it. For the first time in months, Mark came home with a smile stretched across his face. It wasn't the warm, loving smile Olivia remembered from the early days of their marriage. It was sharp, greedy, hungry. He tossed his jacket onto the couch, pacing the living room with restless excitement. "You won't believe this, Olivia," he said, his voice practically trembling. "Someone important is interested in me. Finally, my luck is changing." Olivia looked up from the kitchen table, where she had been quietly grading papers. She forced a polite expression, though unease settled heavy in her chest. "Interested in what, Mark?" "In me," he snapped, as if her question offended him. "A real investor. He says he sees potential in my ideas. Do you know what this means? Money, power, respect. I won't have to answer to anyone ever again." She wanted to ask what ideas he could possibly mean. Mark had no real business, no inventions, no plans beyond gambling and lies. But she stayed silent. She had learned long ago that questioning him only invited his rage. Instead, she nodded and murmured, "That sounds good." Mark didn't notice her hesitation. He was too wrapped up in his fantasy. For days, he bragged about the investor, talking as if his fortune was already made. He promised Olivia a new house, a luxury car, even vacations. But his tone wasn't filled with love or generosity. It was filled with possession. "You'll finally see I'm the man you should be proud of," he said, his eyes glinting with pride. Olivia's stomach churned. She didn't trust it. Mark's sudden confidence, his wild excitement, it all felt like a storm building, one that could sweep her away if she wasn't careful. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Mark muttered in his sleep about money and power. She placed her hand over her heart, whispering to herself, "Something isn't right, something's coming." Meanwhile, Mark prepared obsessively for his supposed meeting. He bought a cheap suit on credit, practiced speeches in front of the mirror, and carried himself with an arrogance that made Olivia shrink further into herself. But even in his excitement, his cruelty remained. When dinner wasn't ready fast enough, he shouted, When she didn't smile at his boasts, he grabbed her arm too tightly, leaving faint bruises. He told her she should be grateful, that soon she'd be living like a queen, though his tone made it clear she'd still be under his rule. At school, Olivia's colleagues noticed her exhaustion more than ever. "You don't look well," one teacher whispered. "Are you sure you're safe at home?" Olivia's throat tightened. She wanted to pour out everything, the bruises, the screams, the miscarriage that haunted her, but fear silenced her again. She forced a small smile. "I'm fine, just tired." But inside, she was unraveling. Her secret notebook of escape plans became her lifeline. Every time she felt Mark's hand tighten on her arm, she imagined the day she would finally run and never look back. The night before Mark's meeting, the house was eerily quiet. He sat polishing his shoes, grinning to himself like a man about to conquer the world. Olivia watched him from across the room, her chest tight with dread. Something about his confidence terrified her more than his anger ever had. As she prepared for bed, she whispered a prayer. "Please, God, protect me. Protect me from whatever's coming." Mark turned to her, his eyes sharp with determination. "Tomorrow, everything changes," he said. And Olivia knew, deep in her bones, that whatever was waiting on the other side of tomorrow would not be salvation, but danger she couldn't yet imagine. The morning of the meeting, Mark dressed in his cheap new suit as if he were a king preparing for coronation. He smoothed his tie in the cracked mirror and grinned at his reflection. "This is it, Olivia, the day we stop living like nobodies." Olivia stood quietly by the door, her hands folded in front of her. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but she kept her fears hidden. "Be careful," she murmured softly. Mark scoffed. "Careful? This is opportunity, not danger. You just watch, you'll thank me when we're living in a mansion." He didn't know that his so-called investor wasn't a savior. It was David's carefully laid trap. When Mark arrived at the upscale hotel lobby for the meeting, he was dazzled. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and businessmen in sharp suits walked past as if they belonged to another world. A man greeted him, introducing himself as a representative for a private investor. Mark's chest swelled with pride. The representative handed him papers. Nonsense filled with numbers and promises. Mark barely read them. All he saw were dollar signs. "So when do I get the money?" he asked eagerly. The representative smiled politely. "We'll need to verify a few things first. Assets, liabilities, outstanding debts. Standard procedure." Mark's face faltered, but only for a second. "Of course," he said, pretending confidence. "I have plenty of assets." But the truth was he had nothing. And the deeper he went into the conversation, the clearer it became that he was in over his head. He left the hotel later that afternoon with a folder of documents and a knot of anxiety in his gut. When he returned home, his mood was volatile. Olivia, sitting at the kitchen table with her school papers, looked up nervously. "How was it?" she asked carefully. Mark slammed the folder onto the table. "They want proof, bank records, property. They think I'm some kind of liar." His eyes narrowed. "You've been hiding money, haven't you? That's why they questioned me. You've been working against me." Olivia's chest tightened. "No, Mark, I haven't hidden anything. I swear." But he didn't believe her. His paranoia turned sharper, more dangerous. He grabbed her wrist, squeezing until she winced. "If I find out you've been holding back from me, you'll regret it." That night he paced the living room, muttering to himself about ways to fake documents, to prove wealth he didn't have. Olivia sat silently on the couch, fear tightening around her like chains. She realized with horror that Mark's desperation could drag her into his schemes. The next morning, he shoved the folder at her. "You're good with paperwork. You're gonna help me fix these numbers, make it look real." Her stomach dropped. "Mark, I can't." "You will," he snapped, his voice like ice. "If you love me, you'll do it." Olivia stared down at the papers, tears stinging her eyes. She was trapped again, forced to participate in lies that could ruin her. The notebook she had hidden under the floorboard, the one filled with escape plans, suddenly felt like the only lifeline she had left. Late that night, after Mark finally passed out drunk, Olivia crept to the floorboard and pulled out her notebook. By the dim light of a lamp, she added a new line. "I must get out before he destroys me completely." She closed it quickly, her hands shaking. She didn't hear the floor creak behind her. Mark stirred on the couch, his eyes half open, watching her silhouette. And in that moment, Olivia didn't realize that her secret was seconds away from being discovered, and her fragile hope could be crushed before it had a chance to bloom. Mark stirred awake on the couch, his eyes narrowing as he saw Olivia quickly tucking something under the floorboard. His drunken haze left him sluggish, but suspicion flared instantly. "What was that?" he muttered. Olivia froze, her heart pounding. "Nothing," she whispered. "I was just cleaning." He staggered to his feet, but before he could press further, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway distracted him. He stumbled to the window and peered out. A black sedan sat at the curb, its tinted windows glistening under the streetlight. Mark scowled. "Who the hell is that?" Olivia's pulse quickened. She had no idea who it was, but deep inside, a small flicker of hope sparked. The sedan belonged to David's man, Thomas. He sat behind the wheel, eyes trained on the house. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to make sure nothing happened that couldn't be undone. David had given strict orders. If she's in immediate danger, you go in. Otherwise, stay invisible. Mark yanked the curtain shut and muttered under his breath, "People watching me. Always watching me." His paranoia grew heavier by the day, feeding off his failures. He turned toward Olivia, his eyes sharp. "If you've been talking to anyone, I'll find out." She shook her head quickly. "No, Mark, I swear." But the next evening, the situation escalated. Mark had gone to meet with the supposed investor's representative again, only to return home angrier than ever. His lies weren't holding up, his debts were catching up, and in his mind, Olivia was the easiest target for his frustration. As his rage exploded, he grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her violently. Olivia cried out, stumbling against the wall. Mark raised his hand as if to strike her, but before he could, the porch light outside flicked on, bright and sudden. Mark froze. "What the?" He stormed to the window, yanking the curtain back. The same black sedan was there, its engine running. For a moment, he thought he saw a silhouette watching him. His stomach twisted with unease. Olivia, trembling in the corner, didn't dare move. But she noticed something Mark didn't. The porch light wasn't broken anymore. It had been fixed. Quietly, without their knowledge. Mark growled, slamming the curtain shut again. "Someone's out there. Someone's messing with me." The following days only fed his paranoia. Strange things kept happening. A threatening loan shark who used to bang on their door stopped coming. Their overdue electricity bill was suddenly marked as paid. Even the locks on the back door, once rusty and weak, had been replaced with sturdier ones. Olivia noticed these changes too, but unlike Mark, she didn't feel threatened. She felt a fragile sense of protection, as if someone unseen was watching over her. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe just a little easier. Mark, however, spiraled. He began pacing at night, muttering about spies and enemies. "They're trying to ruin me," he told Olivia, his eyes bloodshot. "And if I find out you're involved, you'll pay for it." One evening, as he ranted, the phone rang. He grabbed it, barked a greeting, and his face paled. Olivia couldn't hear the other voice, but she saw the fear in Mark's eyes. Whoever was on the other end knew too much about his debts, his lies. He slammed the phone down, shaking with rage. He turned to Olivia, his expression deadly serious. "Somebody's after me, and I swear if you're part of this, I'll—" A sudden knock at the door interrupted him. Both of them froze. And as the sound echoed through the small house, Olivia's breath caught, because whoever was knocking was about to change everything. The knock at the door echoed through the small house like a gunshot. Mark stiffened, his hand tightening around the doorknob. Olivia sat frozen on the couch, her breath shallow, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid it would give her away. "Who's there?" Mark barked. Silence. Then, after a pause, the sound of footsteps retreating into the night. When Mark flung the door open, no one was there. Only the storm wind, whistling through the street. He cursed under his breath and slammed the door shut, his paranoia deepening. "They're toying with me," he muttered. "Someone's watching." Olivia wrapped her arms around herself. She wanted to believe the knock was a sign, a whisper from fate telling her she wasn't alone. But fear held her tongue. She sat quietly, waiting for Mark's rage to burn out. Across town, in a penthouse lined with glass walls and city views, David Harrington reviewed the footage again. The hidden camera had captured everything, the stun gun, the screams, the way Olivia collapsed on the floor while Mark towered over her. Each time David watched, his fists clenched tighter. "Sir," Thomas said cautiously, standing by his side, "we've gathered enough evidence. With this footage, we can bury him legally and socially. The man will have no escape." David nodded slowly. "Not yet. Timing is everything. If we move too soon, he'll slip away or hurt her worse. We need the world to see him for what he is, and we need her safe first." Thomas frowned. "So what's the plan?" David turned to the city skyline, his reflection hard and unyielding. "There's a charity gala next month. High-profile guests, media coverage, cameras everywhere. That's where the truth will come out. We'll play the footage where the whole world can see. Mark won't just be ruined, he'll be exposed." Meanwhile, Olivia struggled under Mark's spiraling paranoia. He demanded to see her phone, rifled through her purse, and even accused her of sneaking out while he was gone. "If you betray me," he warned one night, gripping her face roughly, "I'll make sure no one ever finds you." She bit back tears, nodding silently, but inside something was shifting. The fear that once paralyzed her was slowly turning into resolve. The strange kindnesses, the fixed porch light, the paid bills, the unseen presence outside, were reminders that someone was out there. Someone cared. Late one night, when Mark finally collapsed into a drunken sleep, Olivia sat by the window staring at the rain. She whispered into the darkness, "Whoever you are, thank you." She didn't know her words reached David's ears through Thomas's nightly reports. And when David heard them, his chest tightened. For years he had lived with power and wealth, yet nothing felt as urgent as protecting the daughter of the woman who once saved him. But Mark was no fool. He could feel the walls closing in, and he began making desperate plans of his own. He whispered into the phone with dangerous men, trading promises he couldn't keep. Olivia overheard fragments. "Money soon, investor, she doesn't know," and her blood ran cold. The game was tightening, and she was caught in the middle. At the penthouse, David stood tall, determination carved into his face. "Prepare everything," he ordered Thomas. "When the night of the gala comes, the world will finally know the truth." And as the storm clouds gathered once more, neither Olivia nor Mark could imagine how devastating the truth's arrival would be, or how public their private nightmare was about to become. The night of the gala arrived like a storm disguised in glitter. The grand ballroom glowed under golden chandeliers, the air rich with perfume and murmurs of the city's most powerful people. Wealthy donors, politicians, and socialites mingled with glasses of champagne in hand, their laughter masking the tension simmering beneath the evening's polished surface. At the center of it all stood David Harrington, impeccable in a tailored black suit. His calm, steady presence commanded attention, though his mind was focused not on the glittering crowd, but on the woman who was still suffering quietly in her small house across town. Tonight wasn't about celebration, it was about justice. Thomas leaned in, his voice low. "Everything is ready, sir. The footage will play as soon as you give the signal." David gave a single nod. His eyes flickered toward the massive screen set up behind the stage. Tonight's event was billed as a fundraiser for women's shelters, but it would also become the stage for Mark Carter's public undoing. Meanwhile, Mark strutted into the ballroom with Olivia reluctantly by his side. He had insisted she come, dragging her along as proof of his happy marriage. Olivia wore a borrowed dress, her face carefully painted to hide the faint bruises still fading on her skin. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the glittering room, feeling utterly out of place. Mark, however, was in his element. He shook hands too firmly, laughed too loudly, and spoke of business ventures as though he were a man of importance. His eyes darted constantly, searching for his mysterious investor. David spotted them from across the room. His chest tightened at the sight of Olivia, fragile but still standing tall beside the man who had nearly destroyed her. He clenched his jaw. Tonight she will see she's not alone anymore. As the evening progressed, the host announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Mr. Harrington will now share something important with us all." The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the ballroom. David stepped onto the stage, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "We gather tonight not only to raise funds, but to confront a truth too many choose to ignore. Behind closed doors, violence thrives. It hides in plain sight. But tonight, we will bring it into the light." The screen flickered to life. At first, the room was silent as the footage began. Olivia's screams, the crackle of the stun gun, Mark's cruel voice echoing through the kitchen. Gasps rippled through the audience as the horrifying reality unfolded before their eyes. Women covered their mouths in shock, men exchanged appalled glances, and the silence soon gave way to whispers of outrage. Olivia's body stiffened in her chair. Her eyes widened as she saw her own suffering displayed larger than life. For a moment, shame burned in her chest, but then she noticed the faces around her. Their horror, their sympathy, their fury. For the first time, the truth was no longer her burden alone. Mark leapt to his feet, his face red with panic. "Turn that off," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is fake, lies. Someone is framing me." But no one believed him. All eyes were on the screen, and then on him. Security guards began moving closer, the audience murmuring louder. Olivia sat frozen, her heart racing, her hand trembling on her lap. David's voice cut through the chaos, calm but firm. "This man is not only a gambler and a liar, he is an abuser, and tonight his mask has been torn away." Mark's eyes darted wildly, his breathing ragged. He grabbed Olivia's arm, yanking her toward the exit. "We're leaving, now." But as he tried to drag her away, the crowd rose to its feet. And Olivia realized this was the moment she had to decide whether to remain silent or to finally speak. Mark's grip on Olivia's arm tightened like a vice as he tried to drag her toward the exit. The ballroom buzzed with shock and fury, the sound of whispered accusations rising into angry shouts. But Olivia didn't move. Her heels dug into the floor, her body frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "Let's go," Mark hissed, his face twisted with panic. "They're lying, don't you see? It's all a setup." Her eyes flicked to the massive screen still playing behind them. She saw herself on the floor, curled in pain, begging him to stop. She saw the woman she had been, silent, broken, powerless. And for the first time, she understood that silence had only protected him, never her. A new strength surged through her. She pulled her arm from his grip, her voice trembling but clear. "No, Mark. They're not lying. You did this. Everyone just saw what you are." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mark froze, his eyes wide, his face draining of color. "Olivia, shut up," he barked, his voice low and threatening. "You don't know what you're saying." But Olivia did know. Her chest rose and fell as years of fear poured out in a rush of truth. "You hurt me. You hurt our baby. You took everything from me, and I stayed silent because I was afraid. But I'm not afraid anymore." Her voice grew louder, steadier, filling the ballroom. "Everyone here needs to know the kind of man you are, a liar, a gambler, and a coward who abuses his wife." The audience erupted. Some shouted in disgust, others clapped in support. The cameras meant to cover the gala now swung toward Olivia, capturing every word. Reporters scribbled furiously, microphones thrust forward. Mark's mask cracked. His eyes darted wildly as he realized he was trapped. "She's lying," he screamed, his voice breaking. "She's ungrateful. I gave her everything." "No," Olivia said firmly, tears streaming down her face. "You took everything." Her words cut sharper than any blade. Mark's body shook with rage, but his power had vanished. The crowd no longer saw a husband defending himself. They saw a monster exposed. Security moved closer, flanking Mark from both sides. He tried to push past them, but hands grabbed his shoulders, forcing him back. The once proud man now looked small, desperate, and defeated. Olivia swayed slightly, her emotions overwhelming her. David stepped forward, steadying her with a gentle hand. His voice was calm but filled with conviction. "You are not alone anymore, Olivia, and you never will be again." For the first time in years, Olivia felt something she thought she had lost forever: safety. She looked into David's eyes and saw not pity but respect. Mark, thrashing against security, shouted one last desperate plea. "You'll regret this, Olivia. You hear me? You'll regret it." But his words fell on deaf ears. The crowd booed him, reporters shouted questions, and cameras flashed. His empire of lies was collapsing in real time. Olivia stood taller now, her hands trembling but strong. She had spoken her truth. She had broken the silence. And in doing so, she had taken back the power he had stolen. But as Mark was dragged from the ballroom, Olivia knew this wasn't over yet, because a man that desperate, that dangerous, would not go down without one final fight. The days after the gala unfolded like a whirlwind. The footage spread like wildfire, replayed on every news channel, shared across social media. Mark Carter's name became synonymous with cruelty. his face plastered under headlines that screamed "abusive husband exposed" and "teacher's nightmare caught on camera." For years he had hidden behind lies, but now the whole world knew. His debts, his gambling, his violence, nothing was secret anymore. The police, pressured by the public outcry, reopened investigations they had once ignored. And soon Mark was led away in handcuffs, his defiant shouts drowned out by flashing cameras and angry voices demanding justice. But Mark wasn't alone in his downfall. His mistress, a woman who had fueled his gambling habits and helped him funnel what little money he had left, was also arrested. Investigators uncovered evidence of fraud, blackmail, and schemes they had plotted together. What Mark thought was his salvation had in fact been his final betrayal. The mistress wept in court, but the judge was unmoved. She, too, would pay for the part she had played in destroying Olivia's life. Olivia watched the reports quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She felt no triumph, no gloating, only relief. Justice didn't erase the pain, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in years. Closure. At school, her colleagues embraced her with compassion. Parents stopped her in the hallways to thank her for her courage. Her students, too young to understand the full story, sensed her lighter spirit and hugged her tighter than ever. For the first time in years, Olivia walked into her classroom without fear. And then there was David. He didn't rush her, didn't push her, didn't treat her as fragile. He simply stood beside her, steady and strong. One evening, after weeks of tentative conversations, he invited her to dinner. She hesitated at first, afraid to trust again, afraid to believe in the possibility of love after so much loss. But something in his eyes, gentle, unwavering, made her say yes. Their dinners turned into walks, their walks turned into laughter, and slowly, Olivia began to heal. She shared stories of her students, her dreams of opening a small learning center for underprivileged children. David listened intently, promising his support not as a billionaire, but as a man who believed in her vision. In time, their bond deepened. Olivia found herself smiling again, her laughter genuine, her heart cautiously opening. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't built on fear, but on trust and respect. Meanwhile, Mark sat in a cold prison cell, his once proud swagger replaced by bitterness. His mistress occupied a cell in the same facility, though they no longer spoke. Their empire of lies had crumbled, leaving them with nothing but isolation and regret. The world had moved on without them, and neither had a place in it anymore. Olivia, however, was moving forward. She wasn't defined by what had been done to her. She was defined by the strength it had taken to survive. And as she sat across from David one quiet evening, her hand resting gently in his, she realized she was no longer living in the shadow of her past. She was stepping into something new. And when David finally looked into her eyes and whispered, "You deserve happiness, Olivia. Will you let me give it to you?" She felt her heart race with a question of her own. Could she dare to love again? The sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the church, casting warm colors across the aisle. Olivia stood at the entrance, her heart pounding, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small bouquet of white lilies. For a moment, she closed her eyes, breathing in the peace of the moment. She had walked through hell, but today she was walking into a new life. The organ music began, and she stepped forward. The guests rose to their feet, watching her with admiration and joy. Every step felt like shedding another layer of her past, the bruises, the tears, the silence. By the time she reached the altar, she no longer felt like the broken woman who had once cried herself to sleep. She felt reborn. David stood waiting, his expression steady and filled with quiet devotion. When their eyes met, Olivia's chest tightened with gratitude. He wasn't a savior swooping in to rescue her. He was a partner, a man who saw her strength and chose to stand beside her. The vows they exchanged were simple, but every word carried the weight of survival and hope. "I promise to honor the woman you are and the strength you carry," David said, his voice unwavering. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she replied, "I promise to trust love again, and to build a life where fear has no place." When they sealed their vows with a kiss, the crowd erupted in applause. For Olivia, it wasn't just a wedding kiss. It was the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Weeks later, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. This time, the news didn't fill her with fear, but with joy. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the test in her hands, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sorrow, but of healing. When she told David, he pulled her into his arms, his voice breaking with emotion. This child will know nothing but love. Together, they prepared for their future. David supported her dream of opening a learning center, funding it, but letting her lead. The center quickly became a place of hope for underprivileged children, a reflection of Olivia's heart and resilience. She found purpose again, not only as a teacher, but as a mother and a woman who had reclaimed her life. Meanwhile, far from the light of their new beginning, Mark languished in prison. His once sharp arrogance had dissolved into bitterness. His mistress, now serving her own sentence, avoided him, leaving him utterly alone. In the prison yard, no one respected him. No one listened to him. He was a forgotten man, consumed by regret, living in the shadow of his own ruin. At night, he sat in the corner of his cell, replaying Olivia's words at the gala. "You took everything." Those words haunted him more than the walls around him. Back in the city, Olivia flourished. She carried her pregnancy with joy, surrounded by care, love, and safety. At the opening of her learning center, she stood before a crowd of children and parents, her voice steady. No matter how dark life becomes, there is always a way back to the light. The applause echoed, but what filled her heart most was the quiet kick of the child growing inside her. She smiled, resting her hand on her belly, knowing that this child would never know the fear and violence she had endured. Her life had come full circle, from pain to healing, from silence to voice, from captivity to freedom. And as Olivia looked toward the future, standing hand in hand with David, she knew with absolute certainty she was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, a mother, a wife, and a woman finally free.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today we're diving into a dramatic tale about a girl who discovers her mother's photo in a powerful billionaire's wallet, and how that leads to an incredible family reunion. The most unforgettable moment? When a long-lost love culminates in a heartfelt proposal that promises a renewed future for all. Trust me, you won't want to miss the shocking twists that unfold just before this emotional ending. If you're eager to find out how a single photo changes everything, and why this secret hidden for so many years could be the key to someone's survival, stick around until the very end. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss any of our upcoming stories, and please share your thoughts in the comments below. Where did you tune in from? We'd love to hear your opinions on the characters and their fateful choices. Lily Harrington stood behind the counter at the Clover and Hearth Cafe, absently wiping down a few clean mugs as the late morning rain drummed softly against the windows. For 6 months, she had worked here after school, and on weekends, arranging pastries on trays and delivering steaming lattes to the hurried patrons. She was 16, slender, with warm brown eyes and an ever-present hint of fatigue beneath them. Despite the gentle lull of the falling rain, the cafe was a buzz of activity as regulars scurried in, shaking off their umbrellas and hungrily scanning the menu. A group of college students huddled by the far wall, poring over their textbooks while sipping spiced chai, and a pair of retirees settled in at their usual table, methodically dissecting the day's newspaper headlines. On days like this, Lily appreciated the comforting hum of routine, even though her life had been anything but simple lately. "Order for table 5 is up," called Nina, one of the senior servers who had taken Lily under her wing. Lily set aside the mugs and picked up a small tray carrying 2 black coffees, a slice of apple pie, and a croissant. She navigated the narrow aisles between tables with a dexterity she had earned only through repeated, anxious trial and error. Every tip mattered to her, every extra dollar feeding into a seemingly endless stream of bills at home. That home was an apartment with flickering overhead lights and a near-empty fridge most days. Her mother, Harriet Harrington, was in and out of the hospital for treatments, each visit accompanied by a haunting sense of urgency. Just as Lily deposited the tray at table 5, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, jolting her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Nothing urgent, just a reminder of her mother's upcoming consultation. It was tomorrow, and Lily was painfully aware that she still didn't have enough to cover the next round of tests. At her age, she had long since become accustomed to shouldering financial worries most teenagers couldn't fathom. Lily offered the customers a polite smile and stepped back, keenly aware that the cafe door had just chimed to signal a new arrival. She would typically ignore whoever came in. Her mind was so often preoccupied with Harriet's mounting medical costs that she tried not to get distracted by the flow of people. But Nina's sudden, uncharacteristically formal tone made Lily's ears perk up. "Mr. Westwood," Nina said, her voice almost reverent, "it's an honor to see you again in person, sir." In that moment, Lily turned to look. Standing just inside the entrance was Damian Westwood, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that spoke more of authority than mere wealth. His shoes gleamed as though polished daily, and his posture was undeniably poised. The entire cafe went quiet, an almost collective hush overcoming customers and staff alike. Damian Westwood was the billionaire CEO whose corporate tower loomed over downtown like a silent sentinel. Lily had never seen him in person. Typically, it was his assistant, Ms. Carter, who placed phone orders and hurried in to pick them up. It looked as if Ms. Carter was absent today because Damian was here himself, removing his gloves and sunglasses despite the gloomy weather. "Ms. Carter's out sick," he explained, voice low and resonant. "So I figured I'd come by to see what all the fuss is about with these pastries." Nina nodded, already bustling to get his usual order ready. Lily, on the other hand, tried to quell the pang of curiosity fluttering in her mind. She was used to wealthy customers, some from the private university up the road, and others from the corporate building. But there was something about Damian Westwood's presence that felt different. There was gravity in the way he stood, the aura of someone who had grown used to being the epicenter of every room he entered. It was a world that existed far beyond Lily's paycheck-to-paycheck reality, yet here he was, only a few feet away. Still, she had more orders to run, so she refocused on her tasks. She did not notice that Damian Westwood was moving toward the pickup counter until she heard the distinct sound of a wallet dropping to the wooden floor with a soft thud. By the time Lily turned around, Damian had already bent to pick up his sleek, leather-bound wallet. A few business cards had scattered around his polished shoes, and he reached out to retrieve them. Lily hurried closer. "Oh, let me help you, sir," she offered, kneeling down to gather the scattered items. Nina watched from behind the counter, her expression revealing mild apprehension, no doubt worried that Lily might say something out of turn to their most famous customer. Damian gave a polite nod. "Thank you," he replied, his voice quiet but unmistakably self-assured. Lily handed him the last of the business cards, an array of crisp white rectangles embossed with the Westwood Enterprises logo. As she did, her eye caught on something else that had fallen to the floor, a small photograph. It lay face up, the image of a woman's gentle smile staring back at her. The woman had chestnut brown hair, a dimple in her cheek, and eyes that seemed startlingly familiar. Lily's breath hitched in her throat. It was her mother. Harriet Harrington's image was right there, peering at Lily from an old snapshot that didn't look very worn, yet must have been taken years ago. Harriet appeared younger, her features radiant and carefree, before the weight of illness and financial desperation. Lily's heart pounded, shock lancing through her. This was impossible. Why would a multi-billionaire, a man she had never met, have her mother's photo in his wallet? Slowly, Lily picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. She could hardly speak, her mouth suddenly dry. "Sir," she managed to say, raising her gaze to meet Damian's eyes, "why is my mother's picture in your wallet?" His reaction was instantaneous. All color seemed to drain from his face, leaving his usually composed features starkly alarmed. The cafe fell into even deeper silence, if that was possible, everyone pausing to watch this bizarre scene unfold. Damian glanced from Lily to the photograph and back again, as if trying to reconcile some private, unspoken truth. "Your mother," he echoed, voice barely above a whisper. "She's Harriet Harrington?" Lily nodded, heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Yes, that's her. She's in the hospital right now, receiving treatment for a severe medical condition. What I need to know," she continued, voice gaining conviction, "is why you have her picture." Damian looked around, clearly aware of the watchful eyes of curious customers and staff. His lips parted as though he might speak, but then he closed them again, glancing at Nina. "Could we possibly speak in private?" he asked Lily, an uncharacteristic note of uncertainty coloring his tone. I'm working," Lily stammered, her mind reeling. She could hardly decide which question to ask first. She turned to see Mr. Dawson, the cafe's owner, who had evidently observed enough to know something serious was happening. He gave a curt nod, wiping his flour-dusted hands on a towel. "Go on, Lily," Mr. Dawson said, clearing his throat. "Take your break in the back room. I'll cover your tables." Without another word, Lily led Damien toward a small room behind the kitchen, typically used for staff lunches or the occasional private event. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed, casting harsh reflections on the stainless steel counters and giving the modest space an austere atmosphere. Lily closed the door carefully, muffling the soft clink of dishes from the kitchen. Her mind spun. Was Damien Westwood some distant relative, a friend of her mother's from the past? It made no sense. Lily was certain Harriet had never even mentioned this man's name. Taking a deep breath, Lily faced him. She still held the photograph between two fingers, as if the flimsy paper itself might be fragile evidence of a massive secret. "You asked why I have Harriet's picture," Damien began, slipping his hands into the pockets of his tailored jacket. His voice was low, and though his confidence reasserted itself slightly, Lily detected genuine turmoil in his eyes. I knew her years ago, when we were both at university. We were together." Lily's mind reeled, and she tightened her grip on the photograph. How could she have gone her entire life not knowing about this? Had Harriet hidden it? "So you dated my mom in college," and she echoed flatly. "That's no reason to keep her photo for more than a decade, or to have it in your wallet all this time." Damien sighed, evidently wrestling with how to proceed. "Harriet was very important to me. But when we were younger, my family had expectations, and I was expected to take over Westwood Enterprises after my father. There was conflict. He didn't approve of my relationship with Harriet. Eventually, I was forced to end things with her, or so I believed at the time. It's not a choice I've ever fully come to terms with." Lily found herself stepping back, her body tense with disbelief. That Harriet never mentioned this might speak to a heartbreak so deep she never wanted to revisit it. But Lily needed clarity. She drew a quick, shaky breath. "Look, Mr. Westwood, or Damien, or whatever I'm supposed to call you," she said quietly. "My mother is ill. She's been ill for 2 years, and if there's some connection between you two, I need to understand it now. She never told me anything about you. At all." Damien lifted a hand as if to run it through his hair, only to realize it was meticulously styled. "That's because she never told me you existed," he said, voice tinged with regret. "God, I had no clue Harriet even had a child." His gaze flicked over Lily, lingering with an intensity that made her want to look away. "And now I meet you, and I see pieces of her in your face. Her eyes, her hair, that sense of calm determination." He trailed off, looking suddenly overwhelmed. The door remained shut, the hum of the fluorescent bulbs the only other sound in the room. Lily's thoughts whirled, a chaotic swirl of curiosity, suspicion, and a faint spark of hope she could scarcely name. This wasn't just some random wealthy man stepping into their lives. This might be the father she had never known existed. Before Lily could frame her next question, Damien exhaled slowly, his features resolute. "I think," he said, his voice still soft but growing in certainty, "that I owe you both an explanation. But I also believe Harriet should be involved in this discussion. Is there any chance I can see her? Where is she being treated?" Lily immediately felt protective. She had spent the better part of 2 years watching her mother endure exhausting chemo sessions, terrifying close calls, and the relentless tide of medical bills. Harriet was tired, physically, mentally, emotionally. Having some near stranger with a heavy wallet and an even heavier secret show up could be too much for her. But then again, Harriet had the right to decide for herself. "She's in St. Lucia General Hospital," Lily finally said. "Her next round of tests is tomorrow. I don't know if she's in any shape for a surprise visitor, though." Damien gave a slight nod, a flicker of deep concern flashing in his eyes. "I don't want to stress her," he said, "but if she wants to see me, please tell her I'd like to talk. If you can't do it now, I understand. But let her know I'm here and that I didn't know about you or her situation." His words nearly broke Lily's composure. She swallowed hard and recalled Harriet's pallid face that morning, how her mother's trembling fingers sometimes struggled to hold a spoon. Lily knew Harriet was hanging on by a thread, and these new developments might slice right through it. Or maybe it would mend something Harriet had kept hidden for too long. "I can't promise what she'll say," Lily told him honestly. "I'm not even sure how to bring this up without throwing her into turmoil. But she deserves the truth, and so do I." Frainery, relief softened Damien's serious expression. "Thank you," he murmured, "for at least agreeing to tell her. In the meantime, if there's anything at all, you or Harriet need, I'm willing to help. I know this must sound patronizing, but I'd be happy to cover her medical expenses. No obligation, no expectation. Just help." Lily's brow furrowed, her mind torn. Part of her wanted to accept on the spot. Overwhelming debt had become a crushing weight in their lives, forcing Lily to sacrifice typical teenage experiences to keep Harriet's treatments going. Another part of her flared with distrust. Could a man so powerful truly have been blindsided by his father's manipulation all these years? And if so, what did it say about him that he never managed to find Harriet on his own? Still, the reality was harsh. Harriet needed help now, not later. I'll talk to her," Lily said at last. "But I can't decide for her, and I can't have you showing up at her hospital room unannounced. You understand?" Damien nodded, slipping a sleek black business card from his wallet. He scribbled a number on the back before handing it to her. "This is my direct line," he explained. "Day or night. If Harriet wants to talk, or if there's anything you need, just call. Please don't hesitate." Pocketing the card, Lily stood there, the swirl of emotions making her head spin. It was surreal. One moment, she was just a girl working her shift in a small-town cafe. The next, she was confronting a billionaire over a photograph of her mother. Her future now felt tangled in possibilities she had never even considered. She dreaded the conversation she would have to initiate with Harriet later that day, but she also felt a tremor of fragile optimism. Could this man, possibly her father, be the turning point they so desperately needed? Damien walked her to the door and hesitated. He glanced at the photograph in Lily's hand once more, reluctance clouding his features. "Keep it," he said softly, voice carrying a tremor of longing. "It's your mother, after all." Then he turned and stepped into the main area of the cafe, where all the curious eyes had surely waited for answers. Lily watched him disappear into the rain-drenched street, the bell over the door chiming softly in his wake. No one said a word to her as she re-emerged. Nina's expression was equal parts curiosity and caution. Even Mr. Dawson looked rattled, though he attempted a friendly smile. Lily tied her apron back on, her thoughts miles away from the swirl of coffee cups and breakfast orders. She could hardly wait for her shift to end, so she could rush to the hospital prepared, or perhaps not at all prepared, to upend her mother's world. Late that evening, Lily found herself in the fluorescent-lit hallway of St. Lucia General, a vase of daisies in one hand and her backpack slung over the other shoulder. The corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and overcooked cafeteria meals, a scent she had come to associate with both fear and hope. Harriet's room was near the end of the hallway, where large windows overlooked the city's skyline. Passing nurses nodded politely, accustomed to seeing Lily at all hours. She paused outside room 514, steeling herself. Harriet Harrington, a once vibrant woman full of energy, was now fatigued, but still had a quiet resilience in her eyes. Lily knocked gently and slipped inside. Her mother looked up from a well-worn novel, offering a warm, if tired, smile. Even after all these months in and out of wards, Harriet tried to project positivity for her daughter's sake. "Lily, sweetheart," Harriet greeted. "You're here a bit later than usual. Busy day?" She placed the book aside, focusing on Lily's face with a mother's unerring intuition. "Something happened, didn't it?" Lily set the vase on the small table next to the bed, then lowered herself into the plastic chair. Her stomach flipped. She remembered the photograph in her apron pocket and the promise she had made to Damien Westwood. This conversation could not be delayed. "Yes," Lily began softly, clasping her hands. Someone came to the cafe today. A man named Damien Westwood." For a fleeting moment, Harriet's face betrayed no change. But then, Lily watched Harriet's eyes flicker with recognition, as if a shutter had gone up and then immediately down again. "Damien Westwood," Harriet repeated, her breath catching. I didn't know he was in this city. Lily felt her pulse accelerate. He's been here for years. His company's main offices are downtown. According to him, he moved them here a while ago. Mom, he had your picture in his wallet. Lily's voice shook slightly with emotion. He says he never stopped thinking about you, even though he left. He's also claiming he had no idea about me, that he didn't even know you were pregnant. Harriet closed her eyes for a moment, leaning back against the pillows as if the revelation had taken the wind out of her. I tried to tell him, she whispered. After the breakup, I found out I was expecting you. I tried his old phone number, but it was disconnected. I went to his father's estate, but they turned me away. His father told me Damien wanted nothing to do with me and had already moved on. It broke me, Lily. I couldn't bear to keep trying, not when I had to think about how to support and care for you on my own. Tears pricked Lily's eyes. She reached out to take Harriet's hand, feeling the frailness that the treatments had brought out. A storm of emotions swirled in Lily's head. Anger at the Westwood family for meddling, sorrow for her mother's heartbreak, and a cautious spark of relief that Harriet hadn't deliberately hidden a loving father from her. So, he might be my father, Lily said, the words quivering in the air. And he wants to see you, to help you with medical bills. He mentioned the possibility of moving you to a specialized clinic, the best care money can buy. Harriet swallowed, blinking back tears. I never wanted to rely on him or to disrupt his life, she said shakily. But I had no idea he would be here, quietly waiting, or that he even cared. She paused, trying to gather her thoughts. Lily, you deserve the truth. You deserve answers. And if Damien is willing to help with the costs, maybe it's worth hearing him out. Lily exhaled, feeling a wave of tension lift from her chest. He wants me to call if you're willing to see him, she told Harriet, pulling the black business card from her pocket. The doctor says you'll have more tests tomorrow, and if they don't look good, we might not have many options left. Harriet nodded slowly, eyes drifting to the IV lines attached to her arm. I don't know if I can face him, she admitted, voice trembling. But I've also learned that life is short. If Damien truly means to help, and if it could save my life, how can I refuse that chance? Go ahead and call him, Lily. Let's see what he has to say. Relief mingled with apprehension as Lily dialed Damien's number in the hallway. He answered almost immediately, as though he had been waiting by the phone for her call. Mr. Westwood? She said, her voice unsteady. It's Lily, Mom, Harriet. She's willing to see you. She's in room 514 at St. Lucia General. You can come tomorrow after her tests, if that works. Damien's voice on the other end was thick with suppressed emotion. I'll be there. Thank you, Lily. The following day dawned cold and gray, with a dull sky casting the city in muted light. Lily arrived at the hospital early, wanting to be there when Harriet underwent her latest round of scans. She didn't have classes until later, but attendance mattered far less to her than supporting her mother. Harriet was groggy from medications but managed a faint smile when Lily slipped into the room. Dr. Jacobs, her oncologist, stood by the bed, wearing a grave expression. The scans had revealed mixed results. While certain treatments had slowed the progression, the cancer was showing signs of resistance. Harriet glanced at Lily with a fragile look of hope, and Lily knew they both felt the weight of the news. Dr. Jacobs mentioned one last experimental protocol available at Mayfield Institute, a top-tier facility known for advanced research. But such an option came with an astronomical price tag, guaranteed not to be covered by standard insurance. By the time Harriet returned to her hospital room, Lily could see the conversation had drained her. Still, Harriet tried to sit upright, eyes moving toward the door in anticipation. They waited, minutes ticking by with the sterile hum of the hospital filling the silence. Lily's heart thumped. She wondered if Damien Westwood would actually appear, or if his earlier promise had been just words spoken out of guilt. At precisely 10:30, a quiet knock broke the tension. Lily stood and opened the door to find Damien waiting in the hall, a solemn cast to his features. He wore a tailored suit again, but his tie was slightly askew, as though he had been in too much of a hurry to straighten it. In one hand, he held a small bouquet of white lilies, a gesture that made Lily blink with emotion. She realized he might have chosen them deliberately because of her own name. Behind him, a discreet bodyguard lingered near the nurse's station, clearly trying to fade into the background. Stepping inside, Damien offered the flowers with a gentle nod. Harriet accepted them, her hands trembling slightly, and her eyes swept over his face, searching it with an expression that was equal parts trepidation and longing. It was as if she were seeing a ghost from another lifetime. "I heard about the results of your scans," Damien began quietly, taking a seat. "I'm sorry you're going through this." Harriet's voice trembled, though she tried to appear composed. "I never thought you'd appear again. Not after everything," she said. "It wasn't your fault, but I blamed you for a long time." Damien reached out, then hesitated, as though unsure if physical contact was welcome. "I know I can't undo the past," he said, "but if there's one thing I can do now, it's make sure you have the best care possible. Mayfield Institute is within my power to arrange." Harriet's shoulders visibly sagged with relief and guilt all at once. "The doctor just told me about the possibilities at Mayfield. I'm willing to go, but the expenses—" She faltered, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "I'll handle it," Damien interjected gently. "Everything. The facility, the specialists, the travel if you need it, whatever it takes. And Harriet, I don't do this out of pity or as a simple act of charity. I do this because I still care. And," he paused, glancing at Lily, "because there's a young woman standing here who needs her mother." Lily felt an emotional wave swell in her chest. The father she had never known now sat a few feet away, offering them salvation in a time of desperation. Yet beneath her gratitude, a flicker of wariness remained. People in positions of power often demanded something in return. She studied Damien, noticing the regret lining his face. Could regret itself be powerful enough to motivate this degree of generosity? She didn't know for sure, but she could see Harriet's small nod, acceptance and hope mingling in her tired gaze. Over the next few days, arrangements moved at lightning speed. Damien's influence cleared the administrative hurdles that had previously slowed Harriet's access to advanced treatments. Paperwork Lily had been stressing over, financial forms, logistical approvals, insurance disclaimers, suddenly became afterthoughts as specialized teams from Mayfield Institute reviewed Harriet's case and booked her for immediate consultation. It seemed that, for once, the impossible barriers that Lily and Harriet had faced were crumbling under the weight of Damien's resources. Observing these swift changes, Lily wrestled with a complex mix of emotions. Damien Westwood lived in a stratosphere Lily had never even glimpsed. And yet here he was, stepping into her life with the power to transform it virtually overnight. More than once, Lily asked herself if it was fair to trust him. And each time, the exhaustion on her mother's face reminded her that Harriet's life quite literally hung in the balance. They didn't have the luxury of refusing help, especially from someone who was possibly Lily's father. One evening, Lily wandered into a hospital waiting lounge that was blessedly empty and found Damien seated in one corner, poring over documents on his phone. She approached cautiously, the hush of the corridor allowing her to hear the quiet taps of his fingertips on the screen. He looked up when she drew near, a tentative smile crossing his lips. "Working?" Lily asked, sitting down in a worn armchair across from him. Damien nodded. "Trying to keep up with business, but honestly, my mind has been here, with Harriet." He locked his phone and gave Lily his full attention. "How is she feeling today?" "She's in better spirits, I think," Lily replied, crossing her arms. "I saw her actually joke with a nurse this afternoon. It's been a while since I saw her laughing." Damien exhaled, relief easing the tension in his shoulders. "Good," he said. "I'm glad." For a moment, he studied her in silence. Then he ventured gently, "Lily, may I ask how you feel about all of this?" She paused, picking at a loose thread on the armchair. "I don't know. Everything is happening so fast. Mom and I have been alone for so long. Suddenly you're here, and all those walls she built are coming down. I'm grateful you're helping, but it's confusing. Do you really want to stick around?" Her eyes lifted, revealing a flicker of vulnerability she rarely displayed. Damien's gaze softened. "I missed 16 years of your life," he said bluntly, "and it's something I'll regret for as long as I live. But if there's any way to be part of it now, if you and Harriet will have me, I'm not going anywhere." He swallowed, clearly battling his own emotions. "I need you to know I never knew about you. If I had, I would have moved heaven and earth to be there for you. But it doesn't undo the hurt you've both endured. All I can do is move forward, with honesty and commitment. Lily felt her eyes burn with unshed tears. She'd imagined her father as a figure who didn't care, who had abandoned Harriet without a second glance. It never occurred to her that Harriet might have tried and failed to reach him, and that the Westwood family's interference had sealed their fate. "I believe you," Lily whispered, surprising herself. "I don't know why I do, but maybe because I can see how much you care about Mom, or how your voice shakes whenever you talk about me and what you missed." Damien's lip quirked in a sad smile. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he said. "There's a lot to unpack. Your future, Harriet's health, our relationship, and even the baggage from the Westwood name. But I am all in, Lily." She nodded, letting the magnitude of his words settle into her chest. For so long, Lily had faced the world with Harriet and no one else. Suddenly, another pillar of support had emerged, bringing with him money and resources, but also the chance for an emotional connection she had never let herself hope for. In that quiet waiting lounge, Lily felt a cautious flicker of warmth grow, akin to the first beams of sunlight after a prolonged storm. Several months slipped by in a blur of hospital corridors, doctor consultations, and hard-fought progress. True to his word, Damien arranged Harriet's transfer to the Mayfield Institute, a state-of-the-art facility where Harriet's new immunotherapy treatments showed promising results. Lily juggled her schoolwork with near-daily visits to the institute, but for the first time in years, she didn't have to rely on a patchwork of part-time jobs to cover basic costs. Damien had discreetly set up a trust account for both Harriet's medical needs and Lily's future education expenses. At first, Lily was uncomfortable accepting his help, but over time, she saw the sincerity behind it. Harriet's condition slowly improved under the meticulous care of specialists, her energy returning in small but hopeful increments. She learned to walk short distances again without assistance, her cheeks regaining a hint of the color Lily remembered from childhood. Damien, uncharacteristically, abandoned much of his corporate pomp to be by her side. He visited daily, whether Harriet felt well enough to hold a conversation or was simply resting between treatments. They talked quietly about old times at the university, late-night study sessions, strolls by the campus lake, how Harriet used to tease Damien about his relentless perfectionism. Together, they tiptoed into the domain of new memories, ones that included Lily, who sat with them in the hospital garden, sharing stories from her classes, her hopes for the future, and her innate worries about Harriet's next test results. One breezy afternoon, Lily watched her mother take several steps along a winding path in the rehabilitation area of the institute. Damien hovered close by, hands outstretched in case Harriet needed support. But Harriet waved him off with a little laugh, determined to prove her growing independence. "I've got this, Damien," she teased, shooting him a playful look that made her seem younger. Lily couldn't recall the last time her mother had shown so much life in her eyes. Damien grinned, an expression that lightened his usually serious face. "Right, sorry," he said, stepping back with good-natured acceptance. Yet Lily could tell from his watchful stance that he was ready to intervene at the faintest sign of trouble. The transformation in him was nearly as profound as the transformation in Harriet. Gone was the stoic business magnate. In his place stood a man who had rediscovered a lost love and gained a daughter he never dreamed he had. It was a shift that left Lily both relieved and awed, because it meant she wouldn't have to face the next chapter of her life alone. As Harriet completed a lap around the garden and came back to them, she exhaled, clearly tired but smiling victoriously. "I never thought I'd be able to do that again," she admitted, settling onto a nearby bench. Lily draped a light blanket over Harriet's shoulders, mindful of the brisk wind. They sat there together, mother, daughter, and father, letting the gentle sunshine warm their faces. The gentle hum of conversation drifted from other patients and visitors strolling along the garden paths. It was then that Damien produced a small box from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Harriet," he said, voice catching slightly, "I've been thinking a lot about the life we might have shared, the life we could still share. I know we can't rewind time. We can't regain every lost moment of Lily's childhood, but that doesn't mean we can't create a future." He lifted the lid, revealing a simple but elegant ring that glinted in the daylight. "I'm not trying to rush you, but I love you. I've always loved you. Will you marry me and let us be a family for real this time?" Harriet's eyes widened, tears instantly brimming. Lily's heart pounded in her chest, a swirl of anticipation and joy. She had seen glimmers of closeness growing between them, had even guessed this moment might come, but witnessing it felt surreal. "Damien," Harriet whispered, reaching for his hand. "All these years, I never thought—" She faltered, overcome with emotion, before finally managing a nod. "Yes, yes, of course." A rush of relief and excitement spread across Damien's face. He slipped the ring onto Harriet's finger as Lily watched, tears filling her own eyes. In that quiet garden, the three of them held on to one another, forging a new bond out of a past littered with mistakes, secrets, and heartbreak. Some questions take a lifetime to find answers, and some answers reveal themselves only when everything seems too late. Yet in this case, the final answer arrived just in time to remind them all that second chances are indeed possible. In the weeks and months to follow, Harriet continued to improve, the immunotherapy yielding results that stunned even her medical team. Lily found her own life opening up in ways she couldn't have imagined. No more endless hustles to pay medical bills. No more fretting over whether Harriet could receive the next round of treatment. Instead, Lily had time to think about college, about her own future, and about the relationship blossoming with a father who was both contrite and devoted. She would always cherish that moment in the garden, where the three of them discovered what it truly meant to be a family. And each time Lily remembered how it all began, a simple day at the Clover and Hearth Cafe, the discovery of a crumpled photograph on the floor, and the trembling question, "Why is my mom in your wallet?" She realized that single question had altered the entire course of their lives. Their journey was far from perfect, and challenges still lay ahead. But for now, they had stepped through the doorway that leads from sorrow to hope. And in doing so, Lily felt certain that they would face whatever came next, hand in hand, exactly as a family should. In the aftermath of such a startling discovery, our heroine must navigate new emotions, old resentments, and the hopes of a family finally coming together. Imagine the weight of two people who once loved each other deeply reuniting under the shadow of grave illness, only to find they both secretly long for the same thing all along. The twist that brings them closer and the powerful final scene, an unexpected proposal, leave everyone wondering if healing can truly overcome the pain of lost years. To find out what really happened at that poignant rooftop moment, listen to the complete story. Drop a comment with your own thoughts and let us know what you do if an old photograph brought your past hurtling back into the present. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to join our growing community and stay tuned for more captivating tales coming soon.